So this evening, to talk about virtual relationships in Japan, our main speaker is Professor Masahiro Yamada, and he is Professor of Sociology at Chuo University. So he did his PhD at the University of Tokyo, and he has written a number of books, and he specializes in family sociology, sociology of emotions, and gender issues. And then together with him today, Professor Adrian Favell is fairly well known here at the Foundation. He is a professor in sociology and social theory at the University of Leeds, and is a specialist in Japan, but also particularly in the art world in Japan, although we're not particularly talking about the art world this evening. So Yamada Sensei is going to give us a talk for about 40 minutes, I think, and then the sort of questioning will be led and facilitated by Adrian Favell. So over to you. Oh,
Good evening. And first, sorry, I have to say I'm so sorry because I'm not good at speaking English. Sorry. And so, and thank you. I'm very glad to speak here. Thank you. And before my talk, actually, I'm one of the most pessimistic critics in Japan. Perhaps I think. So today I talk about the situation of marriage relations among young people in Japan. And so I started to study and research family about 4 years ago. I'm a 58 years old man. So at that time, most young people got married before 30. But now Japan has Japanese society faces so say a marriage crisis. So see this slide. In 2010, the unmarried rate of 30-34 is 47.3% for men and 34.5% for women. So about 4 years ago, sorry, it's a Japanese. Yeah, it means years. So about 1975, the rate is about 11% for men and only 7.7% for women. So at that time, most Japanese young got married before 30. But now, since 1975, the rate is jumped up. Have jumped up. And not only marriage, but relationships and sexual activities are in decline. The number of see this slide. In 2005, 27.2% of unmarried people has a study girlfriend, and 37.0% has a study boyfriend in 2005. But nowadays, the rate has been decreasing like that. And as to sexual activities, see the next slide. We observe the decline in sexual activities. It is the rate of young people who never have a sexual experience among unmarried people by age. About so like that. In 2005, the figure is like that. But nowadays, it's a figure of in 2015, the rate jumped up. More and more young people came to dislike sexual activities. And we observe that even the decline in desire for romantic relationship and having sex. So, sorry, I'm very embarrassed. Sorry. So next video. So figure 4 shows the rate of unmarried young without a partner who didn't want to have a relationship increased to about over 50%. Over 50% of unmarried people don't want to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. But the desire for marriage is still strong. So the young people who don't want to get a boyfriend or girlfriend, but want to get married, has been increasing now. Perhaps it is a reverse situation about 30 or 40 years ago. At my young age, the young people who want to get a girlfriend or boyfriend but don't want to get married had been increased at that time. But nowadays, the situation becomes reverse. And so there are many researches that shows the decline in marriage and relationships and having sex. It is one of them. It's about research about high school students. About 35 years ago, over half of high school students had someone to be crushed on. But nowadays, the rate dropped about only 31%, like that. And about sexual activities, perhaps it is unbelievable rate. as for old Japanese, like old Japanese people like me, the percentage of people who have no interest in or dislike having sexuality has been jumped up. In 2008, the rate is like that, but nowadays, like about high teenage, young, high teenage, even high teenage boys, about a third of high teenage boys don't have interest in having sexual sex. So I know even in Britain. So I know in Britain, decline in marriage has occurred. These people get married, but I think there are very deep differences of marriage crisis between European countries and Japan and the other Asian countries. The decline in European countries is decline in marriage in European countries is a result of lifestyle revolution after 1960s. Young people in Europe tend to prefer alternative lifestyles to traditional marriage. You can observe the increase of cohabitation and having children without marriage in Europe. Like that. In Britain, about half of children are born outside marriage. Like that. But in Japan, the figure is very thin. And even in Japan, the cohabitation is very rare. It's only 1.8% in 2015. And the rate was decreased since 2002. It was 2.3%. So, I think the decline in marriage in Japan is a result of obsession with the traditional lifestyle. And Japanese marriage crisis is a main cause of Japan's population decrease. So, Japan faces the decrease of population. So, from 2010 to 2015, about 1 million Japan population decreased about 1 billion. So I explain later. I explain the current conditions of marriage in Japan. So I think the combination of three factors has caused Japan's marriage crisis. One is strong tendency for women to be homemakers, and second is young men who cannot support their family have increased. And most of unmarried and unsolicited, the second is most of unmarried young live with and are supported by their parents. So I'll explain later. I named the Parasite Singles. So this is evidence of strong tendency among women to expect men to take economic responsibility. It's a Swedish data, and most Swedish people say no about the question. Do you agree that husbands should take responsibility for providing for their families? But contrary to European countries, most of Japanese said yes. And next is the data about the approval rate of the statement that husbands should work for money and wives should do homework by age groups. Of course, the figure has been decreasing before 2009, but nowadays the resurrection of the traditional families has occurred like that, and the approval rate is a bit higher in younger age, like that. Okay. And the second factor, the spread of the new economy and shortage of young men with stable jobs. The spread of new economy has given severe impact on young workers. The number of young men who cannot get stable jobs has been increased even in Japan. So such men are, or in Japan, such men are not likely to be chosen as husbands by women because they cannot support their family economically. So there is occurring a mismatch between unmarried men and women. See the figure. This figure shows the mismatch between unmarried women's expectation for men's income and the real income of unmarried men. It's the expectation of unmarried women for the future husband. So, over 2/3 of unmarried women answered that they want to get married with men whose annual income is over 4 million yen. 4 million yen about
32,000.
Thank you. Yeah, but about real income of unmarried men, only 25% of them earn over 4 million yen. So most unmarried men's income don't reach women's expectation. And 2 years ago, I presented the figure in Manchester University. One professor said that, is it accepted that such a rude question in Japan? In England, women refuse the idea that women select their partner by income, even though in their heart they think it is wonderful that their future husbands are rich. And I presented this figure in Beijing last year, China last year. One government officer said that Chinese women selected not select their husbands not by men's income, but their unmarried men's parents' property. So I hear in China as a marriage, as husbands, parents has to prepare their residence for sons. Sons and his wife. And the third factor is related to Japanese specific family system. In Japan, most unmarried people live with their parents and receive support. Over 10 million unmarried young adults from 20 to 35 years old live with their parents. And even now, nowadays, the middle-aged unmarried people who live with their parents has been increasing. The number is over 3 million people. 3 million unmarried people live with their old parents, and even though these people's income are low, but parents' pension is supporting their sons and children's lives. So, in 1997, I coined them Parasite Singles. Yeah, I know this word sounds nasty in English. I know, but perhaps you know, like me, Japanese, ordinary Japanese people don't understand English. So they misunderstand parasite as paradise. Yeah. So their life is like paradise because they can spend all their income on their hobbies or like that. It's a paradise. So the logic of decline in marriage in Japan is like that. Young people hope to create a traditional family even now. Traditional family means a husband mainly works outside, a wife mainly does housework, and is a listener. But the current economic situations of Japan doesn't permit all young people to create traditional families. And most unmarried people live with their parents, waiting for a suitable marriage partner to emerge. But but in most cases, there are one image. So the middle-aged parasite singles has been increased now. So I'm worrying about the future of that middle-aged unmarried people who live with their parents. But today I'll show the development of virtual relationships. So the emergence of many unmarried people who are supported never marry in future. 25% among young under 40 years old are estimated to never marry in their future. So I always say so before my first lecture in my university. So about a fourth of this class will never marry in future. So many students speak to me that students became sad after my lecture. So men whose income are low and allow to stay single. And women who are inactive are likely to stay single. So, but they can live a decent life because most of them live with their parents, even though they got low or no income. So, I think this marriage crisis is due even to crisis of capital formation. So men with low income or no income start to give up getting to get a girlfriend because they fear women's refusal. And women continue to have a hope they will get married with high income men in the future. So they refrain from having boyfriends whose income don't reach expectations. So both say that they don't want to waste time and money in poor relationships that don't lead to marriage. So I think there are deep differences between European and Japanese young people. European people have moved to the priority on intimacy or having sexual contents. Men and women are required economical independence, so they can cohabitate or have a child, have children without marriage, outside marriage. But Japanese people adhere to traditional economic roles. They tend to hope to make traditional families, so if they cannot, they prefer remaining single, living with their parents to alternative lifestyles. So I wonder who ratified the intimacy and personal feeling or sexual contents of unmarried people who have no boyfriends or girlfriends. And first, most of them live with their parents, so parents can satisfy the intimacy of unmarried children. But also, and some prefer virtual relationships to satisfy their intimacy and passionate feelings. So I conducted a research about pets as a family. So I interviewed a lot of people who see their pets as families, as a family, and perhaps many single career women own pets, and one of them said that a pet doesn't betray, not like men. So some indulge in imaginative romance in computer games, comics, or animations, and some pursue for young idols, singers, stars, and some by a temporal intimacy, especially for men, but even some in Japan, there is an industry of delivery, handsome service like that. So it is said rental kareshi, rental boyfriend, like that. And so I think the virtual romance industries have been developed for the demand for unmarried people who have no girlfriends or boyfriends in Japan. So you know, it's only 5 minutes, sorry. So enjoy computer games, or going to maybe cafe, or JK industry, like a high school girls delivery service like that. So we did the research about the virtual relationship among young. So we did in 2010. We questioned like that. Do you fall in love with a character in media? So about the ladies like that. Among young who never had a partner, about 30% for female, and about 50% for men say yes, answer yes, like that. So I know young foreigners who start learning Japanese are mostly interested in animation comics, computer games, idols, cosplay, or both. Perhaps Japan excels to create the virtual contents and systems that make people feel good in virtual world. So that attract young people all over the world, especially Asian young people like that. Also, that's a photo in maid cafe in Hong Kong. He's a lecturer in Hong Kong Chinese University. Like that. And it's a comic world in Hong Kong. Even there has been gospel festival in Japan. So perhaps there have been a lot of unmarried people with a partner, so living up, getting a real partner. So Japan excelled to create virtual contents and systems, right? And it's similar to late Edo period. So in Japan, there have been 3 periods in Japan facing the decrease of population. The first is the late Heian period, about 1,000 years ago, and late Edo period, about 200 years ago, and now their period, there have been no wars, and there are flourish of Japanese popular culture. Oh, so like that, Heian period and late Edo period, and now it's a graph of the population of Japan. So, 1,000 years ago, the population has been increasing, but in Edo period, the population, Japan faced the population decrease, and now. So I think the similarity between late Edo society and now. It's an economic stagnation in both periods. There have been economic stagnation. And in the late Edo period, there was fixation of class and no social development, no wars, no opportunities of upward mobility. So most could forecast their own lives. So in Edo period, I think the development of virtual popular cultures occurred, and that could make people indulge in dream worlds. So, Kabuki, Yoshiwara, Kibiyoshi, travels, Kiyo, like that, men known for prostitute in Yoshiwara, like that. And women known for Kabuki, star players. And Wikiyoe was like internet, mass media, there. Right. So, virtual cultures in late Edo make up for ordinary daily lives by establishing in virtual world. The common people could afford to buy because that culture are relatively cheap compared to aristocratic cultures. So nowadays, Japanese society faces economic stagnations, no hope for economic growth, fixation of status between parents and children occurred according to many sociologists, research. So there are few opportunities for upward mobility among young people. So in Japan, we observe immobility of status for young people. So the job which he gets at graduation decides the whole life of him. And for female, the man which she gets married first with decide the whole life of her life. So the increase of unmarried people who live unmarried lives. So, I wonder, is there, I wonder, and is there hope for young in their world? So, affluent but stagnated society, the society where all cannot have hope in their world. So, I think the increase of young who can only have hope in virtual culture in Japan. Sorry, I skipped that. Oh, but in Japan, perhaps contrary to European countries, the young people are most contented because even though they get cheap, they only get cheap income. They can enjoy. They can enjoy they can enjoy indulging in virtual cultures. So the least contented people are 40s and 50s men because they have to support their children and their parents both. So that's the least. So, but sorry, I skipped. So, this is okay. I think it is salvation for those people who cannot have hope in their work, or device that distract from their discontent in reality and present their effort. I think. Thank you for my bad presentation.
Stand up? Oh, sorry. I would probably let's sit down at the table. Is that all right? You can stand up if you want to.
Right, well, I want to thank Professor Yamada for presenting this again. We heard this talk on Friday as well at a conference at Mismatch in Norwich as well, in the context of a wider discussion about younger generations in Japan and how they're responding in some sense to the social crisis that's being outlined here. And that was in the context of thinking about also alternative trends, how younger creative artists and others are responding to this, and issues to do with potential social movements as well in Japan. So there's a whole set of questions there that we might want to raise, I think, about the big picture here, the big structural picture versus other kinds of examples. We've had two kinds of speakers have presented in the past at Daiwa on these sorts of subjects in a relevant way. The younger sociologist Furuichi Noritoshi, who has a quite different sort of reading about the ways in which younger generations are responding to the objective crisis, as it were, the structural crisis of Japan. That's one area we might want to look at. And I think also we've heard a lot in recent times from Peter Matanle, I think also a regular visitor to Daiwa, looking at issues of population decline. And Peter's work has recently also tried to focus on the population dividend. That is how this particular kind of population crisis, if it is a crisis, might be interpreted in other ways to think about how Japan might be changing towards alternative modes of organising society that actually challenge some of the kinds of forms of traditional social organisation that form the core of Professor Yamada's talk. So I'm going to want to bring in a little bit of those kinds of focus, and I am responding to this as a sociologist. I'm a sociologist of migration principally. I do a lot of work on demographic issues, and fascinated with the underlying social theory here that counterposes, I think, a structural scenario that seems to have everybody trapped with quite a lot of assumptions about the rational action of actors within this system, and that leaves questions as to why the system perhaps isn't changing as well as reproducing itself. Now, I think what you might have gathered from this presentation is quite an idea of how sociologists look at questions, and it's always economics that's talked about as the dismal science, but in fact sociology is the true dismal science. That is, sociologists are real pessimists usually. Economists always think that they may be reducing everything to rational action, but they do think that the market tends to work out in the end, that we have growth, that things balance out, and that people come to rationally adapt to situations in order to produce change in some sense, and that produces political change ultimately. But whereas sociologists tend to fixate on inequalities, on social reproduction, on how social structures constrain people and perhaps prevent various sorts of change. And I think in this version, and this is a quite classical Parsonian sort of sociology that we're listening to, how the inappropriateness in a historical sense of a particular kind of social structure that was perhaps designed for the 1950s or 60s, when that structure continues to reproduce itself and continues to produce certain sorts of norms that dictate the way in which people behave, that instead of producing a changed kind of society, it throws up a series of social pathologies effectively, which we then trace through into, we see first of all in the descriptive statistics about decline in marriage, loss of sexuality, lack of childbirth, declining population, the structural facts as it were, and then we see the symptoms, which are the rise in virtual relationships, social pathologies, people living off their parents, the parasite singles, hikikomori, living in closed worlds of their own. A lot of the stuff that we're familiar with as kind of the other side of Japan and the negatives of Japanese society. Now, I think the logic is very clear, and I think we might want to accept some of the statistics that are being given to us, even if I think some of us would want to look a lot more closely at these statistics and sort of say, well, these are very broad brush statistics that don't give us very much detail, they don't really break down the population, they don't give us any sense of social diversity by class, by location, by they're very two-dimensional sorts of statistics, and we're not also looking really at the in any sense at the causal relationships, perhaps either in the social system that's being described. But let's assume that the basic statistics are as we understand them. That, there is a decline in marriage, a decline in sexuality, population decline is driven by this, and so forth. The question surely must be, why? Why is the system holding? Why is the system still holding if this is the case? It reminded me a lot of and first of all, I think you shouldn't be too put off by the slightly provocative way in which Professor Yamada uses this sort of idea of the marriage market and the pathologies that are going on in the relationships here between men and women, if we accept this sort of the broad brush kind of picture of how men and women are behaving, how they think, and what it's leading to. I mean, it's very similar in many ways to, I read it, it's a bit like a piece of, a famous piece of Pierre Bourdieu's work, when he talks about Le Val des Célibataires, which is a famous description he makes of his village, in which all of the middle-aged single men who have to be the second sons or second and third sons of their families are standing at the wall and unable to get a dance with any of the rare women that are left in the dance, because firstly because there's been a legal shift that changes the rules of inheritance, which means that there's a bigger focus on the older sons getting married and the second ones, the third ones get forgotten. And secondly, of course, because of education, because of changing social mobility patterns, any women that could get out of the place have got out of the place and they're no longer there. So you're left with the mismatch, the structural mismatch, and the tragedy of populations unable to marry and unable to reproduce. Now the point about this, of course, is these sorts of social systems don't tend to endure very long generally. They tend to change, and they change because, and this I think is consistent with the assumptions that we're making about men and women's behaviour in the system, the model that's being presented. They change because people make individual choices, and individual choices accumulate, and stuff happens. Now, this change could come about in two ways, and one is the obvious point, the obvious comparative point. Kristen Stewart made this point on Friday, really, is that, all we need to do is look at Sweden and or other countries that have in the past faced population crisis and that have in fact also faced issues to do with generational change and structural resistance to generational change. And what they did was bring in top-down governmental change that sets up social welfare programs, sets up childcare programs, does all the stuff, in fact, that a lot of Japanese women are asking for, that the state simply starts to provide the kinds of welfare structures that might allow women to go out to work, have careers, self-fulfilling lives, commensurate with their education, commensurate with the modern world in which they're living in, while also allowing them to have children, and also shifting the balance of the division of labour that seems to also be holding together this whole picture. One might also say, why don't corporations change? Corporations are meant to be rational. They're meant to respond to pressures of human capital demand, pressures that require competitive workforces and so forth. And the system which constrains women to leave work, go through education, make a lot of effort in their educational careers, start work, and then be demoted to office ladies or waiting around for the rich husband of choice or whatever, only to then go home and have children, etc. I mean, all of that stuff just simply does not make sense from a rational point of view, isn't it? And corporations are changing, of course. Corporations in Japan are not blanketly reproducing this social system anymore. There's a lot of diversity there. Similarly, I think individuals in these systems from the bottom up are able to choose different sorts of paths. I mean, women do make choices. Women can move into careers that are more adaptable to family life, or which allow them to be extend their choices, extend their opportunities. They can move abroad, of course, and that's people just simply leaving the system. But I think there's all kinds of things going on around the fringes, at least, that are likely to change the system and create some sort of pressure, even if it's not an obvious political pressure in a mainstream political sense. And the men who are left without women can make choices of their own. They can choose to marry immigrant brides, for example. This is also a huge phenomenon in Japan, I think, in the countryside. And so the célibataires, the people that are left behind without the wives in the countryside at the dance, nowadays can order in their brides, mail order, and you get a substantial flow of immigrants into the country. That changes the social system in all kinds of ways, and shifts happen and so forth. I mean, I'm using in some sense a similar sort of structural functional logic, which has lots of problems to suggest that the system itself cannot be as as rigid as is supposed, unless, of course, this is an extremely strong argument about Asian values kind of simply unable to change in the modern world, and I simply don't buy that argument, really. On a second point, I mean, singles, I think one of the things I'm wanting to suggest is that, you know, in a world in which the values that are holding together this particular belief that Japanese people supposedly have in a division of labour between men and women in the household in regards to work and children, and the sanctity of only having children within marriage, the two key kind of foundational blocks, I think, of Yamada's census argument, that these are both anchored, I think, in precisely an outmoded vision of the kinds of economic values and economic aspirations that the mainstream population is supposedly going to have 20 or 30 years after this system has started to unravel itself. That is, you know, this works for a system of dramatic economic growth with jobs for life in major corporations. That is, you know, the anchor and mainstream of the economic system, but does not necessarily work in a changing post-industrial world in which the economy is fragmenting in all kinds of ways. The assumption that the only thing you can aspire to is owning a house and having a job for life, and having enough money to pay for that house and pay for the mindless consumption that seems to drive everybody's life in the Japan that we're being presented. I just don't think, you know, these things are themselves not at all stable in a world in which we have a kind of post-growth type of situation where a lot of people simply cannot assume that they'll ever own a house, that they're coming to terms with other sorts of value choices that take them away from this kind of endless consumption model. And they're also, as we're hearing, getting used to situations where they continue to maintain long-term relationships with their parents over time, living in households with parents precisely because they can't get out of their own household. And I think to see this only in terms of selfish, consumption-minded individuals only obsessed with taking the benefits of living at home with their parents, and not as seeing this as a return in some sense to collectivized help of families, absorbing some of these issues at a family level, again, I think is a problematic thing. I'd see this more as a source in which there are, you know, potential value changes going on that it would be compatible with the broader economic shift that's going on. You know, this was a debate we had on Friday. I think it'd be interesting to have more of a discussion about you know, whether or not parasite singles are indeed parasites, or whether they're in some sense victims rather, or trapped, or not even victims or trapped, but maybe just adapting to a world in which it is expected to have a much longer term and intimate relationship with parents, because that's partly the way in which everybody has to live these days increasingly. Economic, you know, we cannot aspire to economic independence in the same way as possible in the past, in many cases. Finally, maybe just the where the argument goes with the virtual relationships and so on, which may have attracted some of the audience to, you know, because this is the sort of exotic end of the stuff where we talk about maid cafes and otaku culture, and peculiar things, hikikomori and people dating high school students. I mean, all of this stuff is not structurally significant in Japanese society. This stuff is the stuff we love to exoticize and overemphasize as a normal when it isn't normal. The normal, everything else in the argument is based on structural data that suggests, you know, real structural patterns. This part is based on anecdotes and observations that I think are not consistent with what young people are doing overall. You know, I think we need to know more about whether or not these kinds of social pathologies that are being presented are in any way structurally significant, such that they might actually provide this kind of alternative sort of social and cultural environment that could allow the perpetuation of this dualized society between those that have mainstream jobs and those that are left out. We know there's a dualized society, but I'm questioning whether all of those that are cast into the role of fritas and neets, hikikomori, and otaku, unable to deal with the mainstream, really are embedding themselves in these sorts of virtual cultures, as opposed to actually creating viable social and economic alternatives for themselves. And this is where Furuichi's arguments come back in, and where the stuff that I'm most principally interested in here, which is, the emergence of alternative values amongst young people in Japan who do face a difficult situation, who do face all of these problems about getting a partner, getting married, having children, and making a life for themselves, but are opening up various sorts of channels for themselves with things like house shares, creative choices, creative pathways in their lives, more entrepreneurship, who are happier than previous lost generations, and of whom I think there are lots of examples of people that we know in creative fields who kind of adopt these sorts of modes of dealing with the world. I think in the end, I think Yamada Sensei's portrait is a very powerful systemic portrait of Japan and some of the problems it faces. But I don't think that the argument sustains a view that either that the government or corporations couldn't do anything about this if they wanted to. If they wanted actually to have a more efficient and functioning society, they would do things about it. Or that Japanese people don't have individual power to get out of these kinds of traps, and that they're not making, I believe that they're also making, on a social level, they're making choices that are producing social changes and are shifting gender values and are shifting the broader value systems of younger people in ways that are nowhere near as negative as we might think from this presentation.